Ed Fletcher poured more cream in his coffee. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, and behind him the oven hissed, softly, filling the kitchen with warm fumes. The yellow overhead light beamed down. "Another roll?" Ruth asked. "I'm full. You can have it." And Ed sipped his coffee. "I have to go. It's time to go to work." "Already?" "Sure. You're a lucky bum. Wish I could sit around like you." And Ruth moved toward the bathroom, running her fingers through her long black hair. "When you work for the government, you start early." "Yeah, you get off early, too. Well, have a good time today. Don't type any wrong words, any double entendres." And the bathroom door closed, as Ruth shed her robe and began dressing. Ed yawned and glanced up at a clock over the sink. Plenty of time, not even 8. And he sipped more coffee, then rubbed his stubbled chin. He would have to shave, he shrugged lazily. 10 minutes, maybe. And Ruth came bustling out in her nylon slip, hurrying into the bedroom. "I'm late." "Goodbye, honey. I'll do the shopping tonight." "Goodbye." Ned lowered his newspaper and put his arm around his wife's trim waist, hugging her affectionately. "Hey, you smell nice. Don't flirt with the boss now." And Ruth ran out the front door, clattering down the steps. He heard the clicks of her heels diminish down the sidewalk, and she was gone. The house was silent, and he was alone. Ed got to his feet, pushing his chair back. He wandered lazily into the bathroom and got his razor down, 8:10. He washed his face, rubbing it down with shaving cream, and began to shave. He shaved leisurely. He had plenty of time. And elsewhere in the town, the clerk bent over his round pocket watch, licking his lips nervously, and sweat stood on his forehead. And the second hand ticked on, 8:14, almost time. "All right, get ready," the clerk snapped. He tensed, his body rigid. "We got 10 seconds to go." "It's time!" the clerk cried. And nothing happened. The clerk turned, eyes wide with horror, from the little shed of thick black tail, and showed the dog had gone back to sleep. "It's time!" He kicked wildly at the furry rump, and the dog stirred. It thumped around hastily, backing out of the shed. "My goodness." Embarrassed, he made his way quickly to the fence, standing on his hind paws, and he opened his mouth wide. "Ruff!" he summoned, and he glanced apologetically at the clerk. "I beg your pardon. I can't understand how..." And the clerk gazed fixedly down at his watch, and cold terror knotted in his stomach. The hand showed 8:16. "You failed. You failed. You miserable, flea-bitten rag bag of a worn-out old mutt. You failed." "I failed, you say?" "You said the summon time was..." "You summoned too late. You summoned too late. We won't get a friend with a car. There's no telling what will come instead. I'm afraid to see what 8:16 is even gonna bring." I hope you'll be in Sector T-137 in time." "Oh, he won't. He won't be there. We've made a mistake. We've made things go wrong." And back with Ed, he was rinsing and shaving his face when the muffled sound of the dog's bark echoed through the silent house. "Wake up the whole block, why don't you?" And he dried his face, listening. Was somebody coming? A vibration. Then the doorbell rang, and Ed came out of the bathroom. Who could it be? Had Ruth forgotten something? He tossed on a white shirt and opened the front door. A bright young man, face bland and eager, beamed happily at him. "Good morning, sir. I'm sorry to bother you so early." What do you want?" I'm from the Federal Life Insurance Company, and I'm here to see you about it. I don't want anything. Alright, I'm in a rush. I have to get to work. Your wife said this was the only time I could catch you. She especially asked me to come this early. We don't usually begin our work at this time, but since she asked me, I made a special note about it. Okay, you can explain your policy while I get dressed. The young man opened his briefcase on the couch, laying out heaps of pamphlets and illustrated folders. I'd like to show you some of these figures, if I may. It's of great importance to you and your family. Ed found himself sitting down, going over the pamphlets, and he purchased a $10,000 policy on his own life and then eased the young man out. He looked at the clock. Practically 9:30. Well, he'd be late to work. He finished fastening his tie, grabbed his coat, turned off the oven and lights, dumped the dishes in the sink, and ran out of the porch. And as he hurried toward the bus, he was cursing inwardly. Life insurance salesman. Why did the jerk have to come just as he was getting ready to leave? And Ed groaned. No telling what the consequences would be, getting to the office late. He wouldn't get there until almost 10, and he set himself in anticipation. A sixth sense told him he was in for it, something bad. It was the wrong day to be late. If only the salesman hadn't come. And Ed hopped off the bus a block from his office. He began walking rapidly, and the huge clock in front of Stein's jewelry store told him it was almost 10. And his heart sank. Old Douglas would give him it for sure. He could see it now. Douglas puffing and blowing, red-faced, waving his thick finger at him. Miss Evans, smiling behind her typewriter. Jackie, the office boy, grinning and snickering. Earl Hendricks, Joe and Tom. Mary, dark-eyed, long lashes, all of them kidding him the whole rest of the day. And he came to the corner and stopped for the light. And on the other side of the street rose the big white concrete building, the towering column of steel and cement, girders and glass windows, the office building. Ned flinched. Maybe he could say the elevator got stuck, somewhere between the second and third floor. Streetlight changed. Nobody else was crossing, and Ned crossed alone. And he hopped up on the curb on the far side and stopped rigid. The sun had winked off. One moment it was beaming down, then it was gone. Ned looked sharply. Gray clouds swirled above him. Huge formless clouds, nothing more, an ominous thick haze that made everything waver and dim. Uneasy chills plucked at him. What was it? And he advanced cautiously, feeling his way through the mist. And everything was silent. No sounds, not even the traffic sounds. And Ned peered frantically around, trying to see through the rolling haze. No people. No cars. No sun. Nothing. And the office building loomed up ahead ghostly. It was an indistinct gray. He put out his hand uncertainly, and a section of the building fell away. It rained down. A torrent of particles like sand. And he gaped foolishly, a cascade of gray debris spilling around his feet, and where he had touched the building, a jagged cavity yawned, an ugly pit marring the concrete. Dazed, he made his way to the front steps and he mounted them. The steps gave way underfoot. His feet sank down. It was like wading through shifting sand. Weak, rotted stuff that broke under his weight. He got into the lobby. The lobby was dim, obscure, and the overhead lights flickered feebly in the gloom. An unearthly pall hung over everything, and he spied the cigar stand. The seller leaned silently, resting on the counter, toothpick between his teeth, his face vacant and gray. He was gray all over. Hey, what's going on? The seller didn't answer. Ned reached out toward him. His hand touched the seller's gray arm and passed right through. Good God. The seller's arm came loose. It fell to the lobby floor, disintegrating into fragments, bits of gray fiber like dust, and Ed's senses reeled. "Help! Help!" he shouted, finding his voice, and there was no answer. He peered around. A few shapes stood here and there, a man reading a newspaper, 2 women waiting at the elevator. Ned made his way over to the man. He reached out and touched him, and the man slowly collapsed. He settled into a heap, a loose pile of gray ash, dust, particles, and the 2 women dissolved when he touched them, silently. They made no sound as they broke apart. Ed found the stairs. He grabbed hold of the banister and climbed. The stairs collapsed under him. He hurried faster, and behind him lay broken paths, his footprints clearly visible in the concrete. Clouds of ash blew around him as he reached the 2nd floor, and he gazed down the silent corridor. He saw more clouds of ash. He heard no sound. There was just darkness, rolling darkness. And he climbed unsteadily to the 3rd floor, and once his shoe broke completely through the stair, for a sickening second he hung, poised over a yawning hole that looked down to a bottomless nothing. Then he climbed on and emerged in front of his own office building, Douglas and Blake Real Estate. And the hall was dim, gloomy, with clouds of ash. The overhead lights flickered fitfully, and he reached the door handle. The handle came right off in his hand. He dropped it and dug his fingernails into the door. The plate glass crashed past him, breaking into bits. And he tore the door open and stepped over it into the office. Miss Evans sat at her typewriter, fingers resting quietly on the keys, and she did not move. She was gray, hair, skin, clothing. She was without color. And Ed touched her. His fingers went through her shoulder into dry flakiness, and he drew back, sickened. And Miss Evans didn't even stir. He moved on. He pushed against the desk. The desk collapsed into rotting dust. Earl Hendricks stood by the water cooler, a cup in his hand. He was a gray statue, unmoving. Nothing stirred. No sound, no life. The whole office was gray dust, without life or motion. He found himself out in the corridor again. He shook his head, dazed. What did it mean? Was he going out of his mind? Was he... A sound. And Ned turned, peering into the gray mist. A creature was coming, hurrying rapidly. A man with a white robe. Behind him, others came, men in white with equipment. They were lugging complex machinery. "Hey," Ed gasped weakly. The men stopped, their mouths open, their eyes popped. "Yeah, look, something's gone wrong. One's still charged over here. Get the de-energizer. We can't proceed until..." The men came toward Ed, moving around him. One lugged a long horse with some sort of nozzle. A portable cart came wheeling up. Instructions were rapidly shouted, and Ed broke out of the paralysis. Fear swept over him. Panic. Something hideous was happening, and he had to get out. Warn people. Get away. He turned and ran back to the stairs. The stairs collapsed under him. He fell half a flight, rolling in heaps of dry ash, got to his feet and hurried on, down to the ground floor. The lobby was lost in the clouds of gray ash. He pushed blindly through toward the door behind him. The white-clad men were coming, dragging their equipment, shouting to each other, hurrying quickly after him. And he reached the sidewalk. Behind him, the office building wavered and sagged, sinking to one side. Torrents of ash raining down in heaps, and he raced toward the corner, the men just behind him. Gray clouds swirled around him, and he groped his way across the street, hands outstretched, and he gained the opposite curb, and the sun winked on. Warm yellow sunlight streamed down on him, Cars honked. Traffic lights started to change. And on all sides, men and women in bright spring clothes hurried and pushed. Shoppers, blue-clad cops, salesmen with briefcases, stores, windows, signs, noisy cars moving up and down the street. And overhead was the bright sun. Ed halted, gasping for breath. He turned and looked back the way he came. Across the street was the office building. It had always been firm and distinct, concrete and glass and steel. And he stepped back a pace and collided with a hurrying citizen. "Hey, watch it!" Sorry. And Ed shook his head, trying to clear it. From where he stood, the office building looked like always, big, substantial, rising up imposingly on the other side of the street. But a minute ago, maybe he was out of his mind. He had seen the building crumbling into dust, building and people. They had fallen into gray clouds of dust, and the men in white, they had chased him. Men in white robes, shouting orders, wheeling complex equipment. He was out of his mind. There was no other explanation. Weakly, he had turned and stumbled along the sidewalk. His mind reeling, he moved blindly without purpose, lost in haze and confusion. And elsewhere, the clerk was brought in to the top-level administrative chamber and told to wait. He paced back and forth nervously, clasping and wringing his hands in an agony of apprehension. He took off his glasses, wiped them shakily. Lord. All the trouble and grief, and it wasn't his fault. But he would have to take the rap. It was his responsibility to get the summoners routed out and their instructions followed. The miserable, flea-infested summoner had gone back to sleep, and he would have to answer for it. And the doors opened. "All right," a voice murmured, preoccupied. It was tired, careworn. The clerk trembled, entered slowly. The old man glanced up, laying aside his book, and he studied the clerk calmly, his face blue eyes, mild, a deep ancient mildness. They made the clerk tremble even more. He took out his handkerchief and mopped his brow. "I understand there was a mistake in connection with Sector T137. Something to do with an element from an adjoining area." That's right. It's very unfortunate. What exactly occurred? It started out this morning with my instruction sheet. The material relating to T137 had top priority, of course. I served notice on the summoner in my area that at 8:15, summons was required. And did the summoner understand the urgency? Yes, sir, but what? While my back was turned, the summoner crawled back in his shed and went to sleep. I was occupied, checking the exact time with my watch. I called the moment, but there was no response. You called it exactly 8:15? Exactly. Yes, sir. Exactly 8:15. But the summoner was asleep, and by the time I managed to arouse him, it was 8:16. He summoned, but instead of a friend with a car, we got a life insurance salesman, and the salesman kept the element there until almost 9:30. Therefore, he was late to work instead of early. And then the element was not within T137 when the adjustments began. No, he arrived at 10 o'clock, during the middle of the adjustment. A serious matter. During a sector adjustment, all related elements from other sectors must be included. Otherwise, their orientation remains out of phase. When this element entered T137, the adjustment had been in progress 15 minutes. The element encountered the sector at its most de-energized state. He wandered about until one of the adjustment teams met him. Did they catch him? Unfortunately, no. He fled out of the sector into a nearby, fully energized area. What then? Oh, we don't know. We've lost contact with him. We will reestablish contact soon, of course, but for the moment he is out of control. What are we going to do? He must be contacted and contained. He must be brought up here. There's no other solution. It's too late to de-energize him. By the time he's regained, he will have told others. To wipe his mind clean would only complicate matters. The usual methods will not suffice. I must deal with this problem myself. Well, I hope he's located quickly. I will be glad when this is all over. And the clerk flushed and kept muttering. They crossed the street together, Ruth holding on tight to Ed's arm, and ahead of them was the building, the towering structure of concrete, metal, and glass. See? There it is, Ruth said. There it was, all right. The big building rose up firm and solid, glittering in the early afternoon sun, its windows sparkling brightly. And Ed and Ruth stepped up onto the curb. Ed tensed himself, his body rigid. He winced as his foot touched the pavement. But nothing happened. The street noises continued. Cars, people hurrying past. A kid selling papers. There was no sound. Smells. The noises of the city in the middle of the day. And overhead, the sun and bright and blue sky. See, I was right, Ruth said. They walked up the front steps into the lobby. Behind the cigar stand, the seller stood, arms folded, listening to the ball game. "Hi, Mr. Fletcher," he called to Ed. His face lit up good-naturedly. "Who's the dame? Your wife know about this?" Ed laughed, unsteadily, and passed on toward the elevator. 4 or 5 businessmen stood waiting. They were middle-aged men, well-dressed, waiting impatiently in a bunch. "Hey, Fletcher, where you been all day? Douglas is yelling his head off." "Hello, Earl," Ed muttered. "Been a little sick, that's all." The elevator came, and they got in, and the elevator rose. "Hi, Ed," the televator operator said. "Who's the good-looking gal? Why don't you introduce her around?" "It's my wife," Ed grinned mechanically. And the elevator let them off at the 3rd floor. Ed and Ruth got out, heading toward the glass door of Douglas and Blake Real Estate. And Ed halted, breathing shallowly. Wait. Ruth waited calmly as Ed wiped his forehead and neck with his handkerchief. "All right now?" "Yeah." And Ed moved forward. He pulled open the glass door, and Miss Evans glanced up, ceasing her typing. "Ed Fletcher, where on earth have you been?" "I've been a little sick." "Hello, Tom." Tom glanced from his work. "Hi, Ed. Say, Douglas is yelling for your scalp. Where have you been?" I know. I guess I'd better go in and face the music." "You'll be all right, I know." Ruth squeezed his arm. She smiled, a relieved flash of white teeth and red lips. "Okay. Call me if you need me, okay?" "Sure." And Ed kissed her briefly on the mouth. "Thanks, honey. Thanks a lot. I don't know what's wrong with me. I guess it's over, though." "Forget it. So long." Ruth skipped back out of the office, the door closing after her. Ed listened to her race down the hall to the elevator. Ed nodded, straightening his necktie. He moved unhappily towards the inner office, steeling himself. Well, he had to face it. Ruth was right. But he was going to have one time explaining it to the boss. You could see Douglas now, thick red wattles, big bull roar, face distorted with rage. Ned stopped abruptly at the entrance to their inner office, and he froze, rigid. The inner office, it was changed, and the hackles of his neck rose. Cold fear gripped him, clutching at his windpipe. The inner office was different. He turned his head slowly, taking in the sights, the desks, chairs, fixtures, file cabinets, pictures, changes, little changes, subtle. Ned closed his eyes and opened them slowly. He was alert, breathing rapidly, his pulse racing. It was changed, all right. No doubt about it. "What's the matter, Ed?" Tom asked, and the staff watched him curiously, pausing in their work. Ed said nothing. He advanced slowly into the inner office. The office had been gone over, he could tell. Things had been altered, rearranged. Nothing obvious, nothing he could put his finger on, but he could tell. Joe Kent greeted him uneasily. "What's the matter, Ed? You look like a wild dog or something." And Ed studied Joe. He was different, not the same, but what was it? Joe's face, it was a little fuller. His shirt was blue-striped. Joe never wore blue stripes. Ned examined Joe's desk. He saw papers and accounts. The desk, it was too far to the right. It was bigger. It wasn't the same desk. The pictures on the wall, it wasn't the same. It was a different picture entirely. And things on top of the file cabinet were new. Others were gone. And he looked back through the door. Now that he thought about it, Miss Evans' hair was different, done up in a different way, and it was lighter in here. Her purse lying on the desk in front of her, a red purse, red knit. You always have that purse?" Mary glanced up. "What?" "That purse. You always have that?" Mary laughed. "Why, Mr. Fletcher, what do you mean?" And Ed turned away. He knew, even if she didn't. She had been redone, changed, her purse, her clothes, her figure, everything about her. None of them knew but him, and his mind spun dizzily. They were all changed. All of them were different. They had been remodeled, recast, subtly, but it was there. The wastebasket, smaller, not the same. Window shades, white, not ivory. Wallpaper, not the same pattern. Lighting fixtures, endless subtle changes. And Ed made his way back to the inner office, and he lifted his hand and knocked on Douglas's door. "Come in." Ed pushed the door open. Nathan Douglas looked up impatiently. "Mr. Douglas," Ed began. He came into the room unsteadily and stopped. Douglas was not the same, not at all. His whole office was changed, the rugs, the drapes. Desk oak, not mahogany. And Douglas himself. Douglas was younger, thinner. Hair brown, his skin not so red, his face smoother, no wrinkles. Chin reshaped, eyes not black. He was a different man. But Douglas, still Douglas, just a different Douglas. "Where is it? Where were you this morning?" Ned backed out fast. He slammed the door and hurried back to the inner office. Tom and Miss Evans glanced up startled. Ned passed by them, grabbing the hall door. Ed hurried down the hall. Terror leaped through him. He had to hurry. He had seen. There wasn't much time. He came to the elevator and stabbed the button. No time. He ran to the stairs and started down. He reached the second floor. His terror grew. It was a matter of seconds. Seconds. The public phone. Ed ran into the phone booth. He dragged the door shut after him. Wildly, he dropped a dime in the slot and dialed. He had to call the police. He held the receiver to his ear, his heart pounding. Warned them about the changes. Somebody tampering with reality, altering it. He had been right. The white-clad men, their equipment, going through the building. "Hello?" Ed said hoarsely. There was no answer, no hum, nothing. Ed peered frantically out the door, and he sagged, defeated. Slowly, he hung up the telephone receiver. He was no longer on the second floor. The phone booth was rising, leaving the second floor behind, carrying him up, faster and faster. It rose, floor by floor, moving silently and swiftly. The phone booth passed through the ceiling of the building and out into the bright sunlight. It gained speed, and the ground fell away below. Buildings and streets were getting smaller at each moment. Tiny specks hurried along far below, cars and people, dwindling rapidly. Clouds drifted between him and the earth. Ned shut his eyes, dizzy. He held on desperately to the door handles on the phone booth, and faster the phone booth climbed. The earth was rapidly being left behind, far below. Ned peered up wildly. Where? Where was he going? Where was it taking him? He stood gripping the door handles, waiting. And when he awoke, the clerk nodded curtly. "It's him, all right. The element in question." And Ned Fletcher looked around him. He was in a huge chamber. The edges fell away into indistinct shadows. And in front of him stood a man with notes and ledgers under his arm, peering at him through steel-rimmed glasses. He was a little nervous man, sharp-eyed with celluloid collars, blue serge suit, vest, watch chain, and he wore black, shiny shoes. And beyond him, an old man, sitting quietly in an immense modern chair. He watched Fletcher calmly, his blue eyes mild, tired. And a strange thrill shot through Fletcher. It was not fear, rather it was vibration rattling his bones, a sense of awe, tinged with fascination. Where is this place?" "Don't ask questions. You're here to answer, not ask." The old man moved a little. He raised his hand. "I will speak to the element alone," he murmured. His voice was low, it vibrated, rumbled through the chamber. Again, the wave of fascinated awe swept through Ed. "Alone? Well, of course, I'm glad he's finally in custody. All the work and trouble just for..." And then he disappeared through the door, and the door closed softly behind him. Ed and the old man were alone. "Please, sit down." Ned found a seat, sat down awkwardly, nervously. He got out his cigarettes and then put them away again. "What's wrong?" I'm just beginning to understand, I think." "Understand? Understand what?" "That I'm dead." The old man smiled briefly. "Dead?" No, you're not dead. You're visiting. An unusual event, but necessitated by the circumstances. Mr. Fletcher, you have got yourself involved in something. Yeah, I wish I knew what it was or how it happened. Oh, it's not your fault. You're the victim of a clerical error. A mistake was made, not by you, but involving you. What mistake? I got in on something. I saw through. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. That's right. You saw something you were not supposed to see. Something few elements have been aware of, let alone witnessed. Elements? Oh, it's an official term. You can let it pass. A mistake was made, though, but we hope to rectify it. Those people, heaps of dry ash and gray, like they were dead, only it was Only it was everything. The stairs and walls and floor, no color or life. That sector had been temporarily de-energized, so the adjustment team could enter and effect changes. Changes? That's right. When I went back later, everything was alive again, but not the same. It was all different. The adjustment team was complete by noon. The team finished its work and re-energized the sector. You were supposed to have been in the sector when the adjustment began. Because of an error, you were not. You came into the sector late during the adjustment itself. You fled, and when you returned, it was over. You saw, and you should not have seen. Instead of a witness, you should have been part of the adjustment, just like the others. You should have undergone changes. I get the picture. I was supposed to be changed like the others, but I guess something went wrong. Something went wrong, yes. An error occurred, and now a serious problem exists. You have seen these things. You know a great deal. And you are not coordinated with the new configuration. Well, hey, I won't tell anybody. Cold sweat poured off him. You can count on that. I'm as good as changed. Oh, you already told somebody. Me? Who? I saw you tell your wife. And Ned trembled. The color drained from his face, leaving it sickly white. That's right, I did. Your wife knows. I didn't know, but I know now. You can count on me. Consider me changed. And you were going to call the police. You wanted to inform the authorities. But I didn't know who was doing the changing. And now you know. The natural process must be supplemented. Adjusted here and there, corrections must be made. We are fully licensed to make such corrections. Our adjustment teams perform vital work. This particular adjustment, the office, what was it for? I'm sure it was some worthwhile purpose. The old man waved his hand, and behind him in the shadow an immense map glowed into existence. Ed caught his breath. The edges of the map faded off in obscurity. He saw an infinite web of detailed sections, a network of squares and ruled lines, and each square was marked. Some glowed with a blue light. Lights altered constantly. The sector board. A staggering job. Sometimes we wonder how we can go on another period. But it must be done for the good of you all, for your good. The change in our sector. The office deals in real estate. The old Douglas was a shrewd man, but rapidly becoming infirm. His physical health was waning. In a few days, Douglas will be offered a chance to purchase a large, unimproved forest area in western Canada. It will require most of his assets. The older, less virile Douglas would have hesitated. It is imperative he not hesitate. He must purchase the area and clear the land at once. Only a younger man, a younger Douglas, would undertake this. When the land is cleared, a certain anthropological remains will be discovered. They have already been placed there. Douglas will lease his land to the Canadian government for scientific study. The remains found there will cause international excitement in learned circles. A chain of events will be set in motion. Men from numerous countries will come to Canada to examine the remains. Soviets, Polish, Czech. The chain of events will draw these scientists together for the first time in years. National research will be temporarily forgotten in excitement of these non-national discoveries. One of the leading Soviet scientists will make friends with a Belgian scientist. They will agree to correspond. Without knowledge of their governments, of course, and the circle will widen. Other scientists on both sides will be drawn in. A society will be founded. More and more educated men will transfer an increasing amount of time to this international society. The war tensions will somewhat wane, and this alteration is vital. It is dependent on the purchase and clearing of the section of wilderness in Canada, and the old Douglas would not dare have taken the risk. But the altered Douglas, his altered, more youthful self, will pursue this work with wholehearted enthusiasm. A picture formed in Ed's mind. Swirling gray clouds, gray men and women. He shuddered. Look, okay, I'll do anything at all, just don't de-energize me. Sweat ran down his face. Perhaps some alternative could be found. There is another possibility. What is it? If you are allowed to return, you will swear never to speak of the matter. Will you swear not to reveal to anyone the things you saw, the things you know? Sure, yeah, I swear, your wife. She must know nothing more. She must think it was only a passing psychological fit, a retreat from reality. Yeah, she thinks that already. I won't tell her, I promise. You have my word on that. I can handle my wife. Don't give it a second thought. Ned arrived home at sunset. He blinked, dazed from the rapid descent. He pushed the door open and entered the little green stucco house. Ed, where have you been? Been? At the office, of course. No, you haven't. Of course I have. Where else? I called Douglas at 3. He said you left. You walked out practically as soon as I turned my back. Hey, take it easy, honey. Everything's okay. Understand? Things are perfectly all right. If you knew how much I've worried. I want to know where you were. I'll tell you all about it, but what do you say we have something to eat first? I'm starved. I didn't mean to worry you. After you left me today, I realized you were right. Oh? Right about what? About me, about what happened. Go on. I realized that the whole darn thing was in my mind. You were right, Ruth. Completely right. And I even realized what caused it. What was the cause? I'm overworked. Overworked. I need a vacation. I haven't had a vacation in years. My mind isn't on my job. I've been daydreaming. I need to get away. To the mountains, bass fishing. Ed, look at me. What's the matter? Why are you looking at me like that? Where were you this afternoon? I told you I went for a walk. Didn't I tell you? A walk. To think things over. Don't lie to me. I can tell when you're lying. Admit it, you didn't go for a walk. What do you mean? Come on. I want to know where you were. Tell me. I have a right to know. Honest, I went out for a... Tell me. I want to know where you were and who you were with. I don't know what you mean. You know what I mean. Who were you with? Where did you go? Tell me. I'll find out sooner or later. There was no way out. He was licked and he knew it. He couldn't keep it from her. And desperately he stalled, praying for time. If only a distraction would come, he could invent something, a better story. Ruth, you've got to... Suddenly, there was a sound. the bark of a dog echoing through the dark house. Ruth let go, cocking her head alertly. "That was Dobby. I think someone's coming." The doorbell rang. "I'll stay here. I'll be right back." "Good evening." The young man stepped quickly inside. "I'm from the Sweep Right Vacuum Cleaner Company." "Really, we're about to sit down to the table." "Oh, this will only take a moment." And the young man sat down on the vacuum cleaner, put out its attachment, its metallic crash, unrolled a long illustrated banner showing the vacuum cleaner in action. "Now, you'll just hold this while I plug in the cleaner. I'll show you the drape scraper first. Now, if you'll just sit down, I'll demonstrate each of the easy-to-use attachments. You'll notice..." Ed Fletcher sat down on the bed. He groped in his pocket until he found his cigarettes. Shakily, he lit one and leaned back against the wall, weak with relief. He gazed up, a look of gratitude on his face. "Thanks. I think we'll make it after all. Thanks a lot."